It's the power of pulling back. Not out of spite, not out of pride, but out of clarity. You see, we were never taught this growing up. We were taught to show up, to answer every call, to soften tension, to fill silence, to be useful. We were told that goodness looks like availability, that kindness means saying yes, that love means being needed. But what if I told you that your greatest power isn't in your presence, it's in your absence? This isn't a game. It's not manipulation. It's a profound truth rooted in both psychology and Stoic philosophy. People value what becomes rare. And when you make yourself constantly available, emotionally, energetically, even spiritually, you begin to disappear. Not because others take you for granted, but because you stop holding space for your own worth. Pulling back isn't about withholding. It's about remembering. It's about realizing that the more you give away your energy without discernment, the more you erode the signal of your own soul. You become a function, a role, a background character in other people's chaos. And somewhere along the way, you forget that you were never here to be convenient. You were here to be whole. In Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius said, "The more we value things outside our control, the less control we have." And what is more outside your control than how others perceive you, how they react to your boundaries, how they interpret your silence? That's why pulling back is not a retreat. It's a reclamation of time, of clarity, of sovereignty. Because when you stop explaining, stop performing, stop reacting on cue, you create a new rhythm. And that rhythm is your own. This video is for anyone who feels drained by being needed, who fears that saying no might make them unloved. It's for the fixers, the feelers, the givers who have forgotten how to give to themselves. We'll explore how silence shifts dynamics, how boundaries protect your spirit, and how detachment can become a form of compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. You'll learn that not every call needs answering, not every argument needs your energy, and not every relationship deserves front-row access to your heart. This is not about being hard. It's about becoming honest. So if you're tired of being emotionally overdrawn, if you're ready to feel the fullness of your own presence again, stay with me. Because reclaiming your life force doesn't begin with doing more. It begins with pulling back. Rule number 1, silence is a powerful strategy. True strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't explain. It doesn't need the last word. It simply pulls back, quietly, deliberately, and lets the silence speak. We're taught from a young age that we must defend ourselves, that we must respond, clarify, justify. But the strongest people you will ever meet, the ones who truly hold power, don't argue. They disappear. And their absence makes more noise than any speech could ever deliver. This isn't emotional manipulation. It's emotional mastery. You see, when you always react, when your buttons are easy to push, when you always rush to correct or comfort or contain, people stop hearing your words. They only respond to your patterns. And worse, they start predicting them. Your kindness becomes a reflex they rely on. Your anger becomes entertainment. Your presence becomes a habit they stop appreciating. But something shifts when you choose stillness instead of a comeback, when you don't rise to the bait, when you take a breath instead of firing off a response. You disrupt the entire energetic script. The drama can't continue without your participation. And in that silence, power returns to where it belongs. You. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Much of that suffering is born from our compulsion to react. But silence is not weakness. In fact, it requires more strength to stay still than to explode. When someone provokes you and you don't react, you don't flinch, don't fold, don't feed the fire, you become unpredictable. And unpredictable people are powerful because no one can script their behavior. You're not withdrawing to punish. You're stepping back to protect. You're no longer offering your nervous system as a battleground for someone else's chaos. You're no longer handing out explanations like apologies. And you're certainly not wasting energy on ears that were never listening. This is the beginning of sovereignty, of inner steadiness, of psychological economy. Because every reaction is a purchase, and silence is the moment you ask yourself, is this worth my energy? So let the silence settle. Let your absence echo louder than your presence ever could. Let people feel what it means to no longer have free access to your energy. And most importantly, let yourself feel the peace that comes from not being pulled into storms that were never yours to weather. This is not coldness. This is power, refined, conscious, and finally, yours. Rule number 2, you're not loved for who you are. You're needed for what you do. Let's be honest. Many people in your life don't love you. They love what you do for them. The version of you that fixes, calms, carries, explains, softens. The one who shows up even when you're exhausted. The one who never says no, because you've been trained to believe that being needed is the same as being loved. But it's not. What looks like love on the surface, warmth, gratitude, admiration, is often just utility in disguise. You're not being seen. You're being used, gently, perhaps unknowingly, but used nonetheless. And the more reliable your helpfulness becomes, the less visible your soul becomes. You're not the person they care for. You're the function they depend on. It's subtle but corrosive, because over time you begin to measure your worth by your usefulness. You become terrified of resting, because rest might disappoint someone. You become anxious about saying no, because no might make them leave. And so, piece by piece, you shapeshift into a role that feels safe, needed, praised, but not truly you. Carl Jung called this the collapse of self into persona, a life spent performing the version of yourself that earns approval, instead of honoring the version that longs to breathe. And when you live like that long enough, you forget what your authentic voice even sounds like. The silence around your own needs grows louder. You begin to wonder, do they actually see me, or just the help I offer? Here's the truth. If people only value the version of you that serves, sacrifices, and stays silent, then their affection is not love. It's dependence. And it comes at the cost of your soul. True connection isn't built on what you give. It's built on who you are when you stop giving. If someone only stays because you're always available, always agreeable, always giving, they're not staying for you. They're staying for the convenience. And that is not intimacy. That is emotional economy. So step back. Pause before offering yourself up again. Ask, if I stopped fixing, softening, rescuing, would they still show up? And more importantly, if I stopped being useful, would I still feel worthy? Because the moment you begin reclaiming your identity from the grip of constant service, you stop performing for love and start living from truth. And that, my friend, is when the real you begins to emerge. Rule number 3. Saying no is an act of self-respect. You weren't born to say yes to everything, but somewhere along the way, you were taught that kindness means compliance, that generosity means self-abandonment, that being a good person means always being available, even when it costs you your peace. And so you say yes to favors you didn't want, to events your soul begged you to skip, to conversations that leave you heavy, not heard, to roles that drain you but make others comfortable. And each time you betray your own intuition, your body feels it, not just emotionally, physically. That tightness in your chest, that fog in your mind, that quiet resentment simmering under your smile. That's not weakness, that's your nervous system waving a red flag, pleading for rest, clarity, and boundaries. Burnout isn't a failure of strength. It's the natural consequence of always saying yes when you meant no. Every unnecessary yes is a tiny fracture in your self-respect. Because saying yes out of guilt is not kindness. It's fear in costume. The truth is, your number is sacred. It's the invisible fence that guards your energy. It's the line that separates your truth from someone else's expectations. It's the voice that says, I matter too. Stoicism teaches us to act from virtue, not compulsion. And sometimes the most virtuous act isn't heroic giving, but quiet, firm refusal. Carl Jung would say that every misaligned yes is a shadow agreement. Your mask saying yes while your real self screams no. So pause the next time someone asks something of you. Don't just scan your calendar, scan your spirit. Does it feel light or heavy? Does it nourish you or deplete you? Does it honor your truth or cost you peace? If the answer is, I don't want to, but I'm afraid to disappoint, then that's your boundary. And your boundary is not up for negotiation. Here's the paradox. The more you say no, the more your yes becomes honest, powerful, and clean. Not performative, not resentful, not dragged out of guilt. Saying no doesn't make you selfish. It makes you whole. It means you've stopped performing emotional labor for a world that never pauses to ask if you're okay. It means you've stopped leaking energy into spaces that only return emptiness. It means you've remembered that your time, your attention, your life force is yours. So the next time your soul whispers, don't go, don't agree, don't pick up that call, listen. Not because you're cold, but because you're finally learning to stay warm inside your own life. Rule number 4. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your peace. You are not a subscription service. You do not owe anyone 24/7 access to your mind, your heart, or your time. Let's get something straight. Needing space, choosing silence, or stepping back is not rude. It's not dramatic. It's necessary. But the world has conditioned you otherwise, to always explain, to soften every boundary, to justify every no with a 5-paragraph essay that begins with, I'm sorry. You are not here to apologize for protecting your sanity. There will be people who don't understand why you disappeared for a while, who ask, why didn't you reply? Why didn't you come? What's wrong? And here's your answer. Nothing is wrong. I'm just choosing peace. You don't need to be available to everyone at the cost of being available to yourself. You don't have to keep bleeding energy just to make others feel secure in their chaos. You don't need to explain why your soul craved stillness more than small talk. Sometimes silence is not withdrawal, it's recalibration. Sometimes you go quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally value who you say it to. Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and becoming who you truly are. That requires solitude, reflection, unapologetic stillness. The world worships noise, but your evolution, it thrives in quiet. There is power in not replying, power in not showing up to every emotional tug of war, power in pulling back, not to punish, but to protect what's sacred in you. And make no mistake, your peace is sacred. When someone questions your silence, remember, they're reacting to the loss of access, not the loss of connection. True connection honors silence. True connection doesn't panic when you don't explain yourself. True connection respects your pauses as part of your breath, not as rejection. So release the urge to explain everything. You don't need to send that long message. You don't need to give someone closure they never gave you. You don't need to defend your peace to those who thrive on your unrest. Silence is not a gap in connection. It's a boundary in motion. It's the soft armor of the soul that knows, not everyone deserves a front row seat to your healing. So step back without guilt. Be still without apology. Protect your peace, not through argument, but through quiet, deliberate absence. Because peace isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just you, choosing not to explain anymore. Rule number 5, Carl Jung and the process of individuation, reclaiming the real you. You've played the role so well, even you forgot it was an act, the reliable one, the strong one, the fixer, the helper, the listener, the buffer. And in all that performance, who did you become? Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we wear to survive, to function, to be accepted. But wear that mask long enough, and you start confusing it with your face. You forget who you were before the world taught you who to be. And here's the quiet tragedy. Most people don't see you. They see a projection of you that serves them. their comfort, their chaos, their version of reality. They love how you absorb their storms, not because they know your heart, but because your silence makes theirs easier to bear. They call you kind, they call you easygoing. But what they really mean is, you don't make waves. That's not love. That's utility. That's performance in exchange for proximity. And the moment you step out of that role, when you stop laughing on cue, stop apologizing for your needs, stop showing up just to be useful, watch what happens. The warmth cools. The texts slow, they say you've changed. And they're right. You have. You've stopped playing the part. You've started remembering who you were before the script was written for you. This is the beginning of individuation, Jung's term for the sacred return to self. Not the self that pleases, not the self that performs, but the self that is. The one who feels deeply, the one who questions the old stories, the one who knows, I am not just what I do for others. Individuation is not rebellion, it's reclamation. It's the spiritual process of peeling away the masks, one by one, until only your essence remains. But make no mistake, it's not always easy. The people who benefited from the mask will resist its removal. They'll call your silence selfish, your truth inconvenient, your boundaries too much. Let them. Because your job is not to be digestible. Your job is to be whole. This process, this peeling, this shedding, it's uncomfortable, but it's also holy. It is the soul finally saying, I'm done being edited. I'm done performing wellness while quietly decaying. You weren't born to play a role. You were born to embody your reality, even if it doesn't fit their fantasy. So take the mask off. Let them be uncomfortable, because the ones who truly see you won't ask you to shrink to stay visible. Rule number 6, reconnect with your true self through intentional silence. Silence is not surrender. It is one of the subtlest forms of power a human being can possess. You were taught that whoever speaks loudest wins, that you must react quickly, argue fiercely, defend yourself with words, evidence, even with raised voices if necessary. But what happens when you don't react? When you choose intentional silence, you are no longer controlled by emotion. You become the one in control of it. The moment you pause before replying, the moment you no longer feel the need to win the argument, that's not weakness. That's your inner strength finally speaking. Carl Jung called this the first step of individuation, the process of returning to your authentic self. And to begin that process, you must separate yourself from reflexes programmed by trauma, by society, by roles you once mistook for personality. And to do that, you need silence. Not the silence of being silenced, but the silence that comes from clarity so deep, it no longer needs to prove anything. It's the moment you see the anger, but don't get swallowed by it. It's when you recognize manipulation, yet refuse to take the bait. It's when you know you could scream, but instead you choose to take a breath and walk away. Intentional silence is the refusal to fight battles that lead nowhere. It's the quiet declaration, I don't need to react to prove who I am. In a modern world where reactivity is rewarded with attention, with likes, with viral drama, silence is feared. Because silence doesn't feed conflict, it reveals truth. And in that silence you begin to hear something far more important, your inner voice. A voice that has been drowned out for far too long by noise, obligation, and performance. Refusing to react instantly doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you've matured enough to choose a meaningful response. You don't return to your true self by shouting, "This is who I am." You return by quietly stepping away from games that no longer deserve your presence. Rule number 7, healing through sacred solitude. There is a kind of loneliness that isn't empty. It's overflowing with truth. It's not the sadness of being without others, but the quiet relief of no longer needing to perform. In a world that worships constant connection, being alone is often mislabeled as failure, as emptiness, as proof that you're not enough. But what if solitude wasn't a punishment, but a blessing? Carl Jung believed that in order to truly enter the process of individuation, the return to your original self, you must first step away from the crowd, withdraw from the roles, and surrender to the space where no one needs you to serve. Sacred solitude is the space you create to finally hear yourself. It's when you stop searching for your reflection in others' eyes and begin to turn inward. It happens when you grow tired of relationships that depend on the function you perform, the listener, the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who's always okay. And one day you stop. You stop texting first, you stop trying so hard, you stop proving anything. At first it feels hollow, but just beneath that surface, there's a doorway leading back to you, the real you. The one who doesn't need to be decorated in usefulness. The one who was buried beneath roles. The one who once believed that constant presence was the way to keep love. When you enter sacred solitude, you discover something extraordinary. You are not lonely. You are simply alone, with yourself. And that doesn't make you weak. It makes you awake. You begin to realize those conversations that drained you weren't connection. They were depletion. Those relationships you feared losing were the very places where you lost yourself. And when you retreat from those energy-draining interactions, what's left? You, with all your quiet, all your truth, all your wholeness. From that stillness, you begin rebuilding a life that no longer depends on performance, a life that is simple, sufficient, and crystal clear. Because the deepest healing doesn't happen in the crowd, it happens in deliberate solitude. Not everyone dares to enter that space, but if you're brave enough to stay, you won't just find peace. You'll find yourself. You were not born to be on call for other people's emotions, not to be someone's emotional support button, 24/7, not to always be the one who's understanding, flexible, resilient, even as you quietly fracture inside. You were born to live in harmony with the frequency of your soul, a frequency that doesn't need validation to have value, a frequency that does not submit to expectations, pressure, or control. It simply needs to be heard by you. And in order to hear it, sometimes you have to do what feels like the opposite of instinct. You have to pull back. Pull back from the roles you've worn for far too long. The kind one, the reliable one, the one who's always there. Step away from conversations where you're always the one explaining. Withdraw from relationships where your presence is taken for granted. You don't need to shout. You don't need to explain. You don't need to argue to reclaim your worth. You just need to be silent and let that silence speak for you. Silence is a high language. It is a declaration that you see the truth, that you no longer wish to play the game of roles, functions, or affection disguised as control. You stop, not because you're weak, but because you're awake. You pull back, not to punish others, but to protect the parts of your soul that still have time to bloom. You go silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need to be understood to feel whole. This pulling back is rebirth. It is the moment you stop clinging, stop performing, stop enduring, and start being, fully, truthfully, without needing to be used in order to feel worthy. Yes, you may lose a few people when you step out of the role, but you will find something far more important: yourself. If you've ever felt exhausted from always having to be someone just to be loved, if you're learning to rest without guilt, if you're learning to say no without apology, if you're stepping into that sacred silence where you no longer serve but simply exist, leave a comment below. I have come home to myself. You are not alone on this journey. There are thousands of others unmasking, stepping off stage, and learning to live as human beings, not performances. If this video stirred something in you, share it with someone who needs it. Someone who always gives, always endures, always says, I'm fine, but is quietly fading away. They don't need advice. They need a mirror. Let your rebirth be their reminder. You have the right to choose yourself. You have the right to rest. You have the right to live as you truly are.